So just that, I'm just explaining I'm explaining why we're doing this. So because of the Open Meetings Act, we can't allow someone remote in to lead the meeting. That's why Ms. Guy has to do it. But he can participate, counts to the meeting and all that. But that's why it's going to be kind of squirrely, because we have dealing with that, and then apparently the air conditioner's not fixed, so we have to do this all sweaty too.
Good.
So there you go.
Okay, and Jeremiah, at this point, I believe you're going to speak.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Guy, for leading this again. Unfortunately, our household has been fallen victim to COVID, so we are quarantining in order to prevent the spread of that. So, number item 4 is consent agenda. And I've kind of restructured this for moving forward, and the idea would be that most of these items moving forward, for the most part, we're aware of, so we're not having to go individually through everything. I will say this, in the batch of invoices you have before you, there are some definite issues that I see moving forward that I'm going to be addressing. Number one, we're, as the EDC, paying for 2 versions of internet service at Hovis Park. And the vendor who has been allowed to do this actually just upped the internet service as well on his end without a contract in place at all. So I am working through that to find out who gave him that authorization, and several issues there. But for the most part, most invoices are going to be acceptable. Again, with that major caveat that there are a few issues. Additionally, if you'll notice, there's an invoice in there for Sprint and also for Verizon. Mm-hmm. I want to make a distinction on that the Sprint invoice is for Vicky Casto, the administrative assistant's cell phone. The Verizon invoices are for the tablets that the EDC purchased at one time for City Council and EDC board members. To date, we've only received 3 of those tablets back, and we're paying for 13 lines of internet service. And I'm wanting that stop put to that immediately. One person's using 60 gigabytes of data a month. Not sure exactly what they're doing, but in our possession, we only have 3 tablets of the 13. I've asked for Ms. Castro or myself to be put on the account as an authorized user so I can contact Verizon to get these lines shut down. Ms. Harrison has not done that so far, and so we've been unsuccessful in being able to go in and essentially put a stop to these multiple lines of accounts. Outside of that, that's the major issues I see on these requests. And additionally, on the Wells Fargo account, there were 2 charges on there for Amazon. When I questioned those to Ms. Harrison, because it's on her credit card, she stated she did not know how those happened, and she was calling to report those as fraud, but she has yet to follow up with me with a report of actually reporting those. So we'll be discussing the credit card as a later item as well. But those are, again, the major issues, and I want to make you all aware that I am aware of those, and we are looking into those as well and hoping to put a stop to some of these in the future.
So then what you'll do is just entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay,
I move to I move to approve a consent agenda.
and can we get a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, moving on to item 5, discuss and possible action nominating BEDC officer, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer.
So this may seem redundant because you just did this last month, but just the way this thing's set up, every July you have, we count this as your annual meeting, and at your annual meeting you're supposed to set the officers. Last month, what you're doing, since it was a new board created, you're filling in for the remainder of the terms for the other people. And so that's why it's redundant, but we're going to do it again. And I would assume that it would be the same people unless you just got tired of what you're doing in the last month and you want to change.
No, I think
tonight was something.
No, you guys didn't.
Okay, well, I guess we'll go through, sorry.
Any requests for change?
Any requests for change, or is everyone, can I have a motion for us to be all in favor of the three that were nominated?
I move to nominate Director Hill for president, Director Guy for vice president, and Director Aguilar for secretary treasurer.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Aye.
I did.
Aye.
Oh, she said.
4.
Ms. Van, sorry. Okay, item 6. Discuss impossible action regarding credit cards to be issued to president, secretary, treasurer, and administrative assistant.
On this one, traditionally, the president and city secretary have had a credit card to be used for the purpose of purchasing office supplies, supplies in general, training reservations, and things like that. I think it's personally more prudent to have the president, secretary/treasurer, and our administrative assistant as the holder of those cards. I would like to have us remove the city secretary as a holder of those cards.
Are we allowed to talk? I don't understand.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any particular reason why the city secretary had access to it?
That's just how they've been set up before. The problem with that is anything that the EDC needs to do would always have to go through her. So right now, the EDC is unable to even purchase paper for their office without going through her, and then when Ms. Harrison has time to go do it, she does it. And it's not a very efficient policy with the way things are at the moment. We obviously, in one of our future meetings, will need to discuss financial control policies so we make sure those aren't getting abused. But right now, it just doesn't make sense. And, you know, again, if we can't purchase just the basic necessities without a elongated period of time, it, to me, is just inefficient in totality.
I think this one makes sense also because it goes in line with what council has already voted upon in terms of separating out those duties completely.
We
Trying-
voted on that?
I'm sorry?
We voted on that?
City council.
City council, yeah,
Yes,
gotcha,
in terms, like separating out those duties completely and trying to establish that EDC is its own entity, which is what it's supposed to be anyhow. It doesn't make sense to continue using city employees for different tasks and duties and allow them access to credit cards and accounts and things like that.
Does anyone else have any further comments? Okay, then, want to get a motion for the credit cards to go to the president, secretary, treasurer, and administrative assistant, and not the city secretary.
I move to request credit cards to be issued for our president, secretary, treasurer, and administrative assistant, and remove the credit card capability from our city secretary.
Can we get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
So anyone can say what Samantha just said, right?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure if certain people,
I'm just,
this is all new still.
I'm just learning. So-
Okay. No, I'm still learning from her, so, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Still learning.
Okay, and item number 7, discussion and possible action regarding date and time change for regular meetings.
Board, this is just kind of a procedural. I know I reach out to each one of you individually. What we're wanting to do is change for our regular meeting to be 5:30 p.m. on the first Thursday of every month. That way it kind of streamlines the process if we have things going from the EDC to the city. It allows it to be done essentially in one day versus the first of the month and maybe the end of the month for the city. It just kind of expedites that. And I've discussed this with each one of y'all kind of one-on-one. And that's essentially we're formally approving that will be the set date and time moving forward for our regular monthly meetings.
I like it.
I like it.
I do too. Works well for me.
Yeah.
Take up one day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Not one day, 1 week, and another day the next week, and another day 2 weeks after that.
Yeah.
And just so the board knows, I mean, unlike the city council, you really don't have special meetings versus regular meetings. So we'll set this time, that's what we'll base off it. If it ever works out that we don't get a quorum or something, it's a little easier for you to set another meeting. Or if we have something coming up, like a project that comes up that we need really quick action, we just call a meeting and get that done. And so you're not locking yourself into only this one day to take any action. But this is going to be our regular meeting day to plan on for everybody.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay, can we get a motion to change the meetings to the first Thursday of each month at 5:30 PM?
I motion, can I say all that? I move to move all meetings to the first Thursday of the month at 5:30.
Second.
Oh,
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, item number 8, discussion and possible action regarding the duties and responsibilities of the recording secretary and administrative assistant.
All right, board, this is another agenda item that discusses kind of the segregation of duties. We kind of have an unusual setup presently for an EDC where our city secretary essentially performs most every function of our EDC. Meanwhile, we're paying for administrative assistant who Vicki does a lot. I've spent a lot of time with her the last few weeks, but she's also very underutilized in what she should be doing. What I'm proposing is that we shift all duties that our city secretary has been doing for the EDC over to Ms. Casto, and that we essentially eliminate the recording secretary position by the beginning of the next fiscal budgetary cycle, which would be September 1st. Now, this may require that we send Ms. Casto to some training, but it essentially would bring everything kind of central in-house. It would kind of reduce the delay of information. There's several things that, again, we could be running a lot more efficiently if we had one individual as our point person for our administrative functions.
Anyone have any comments, concerns, or input?
and Miss Vicky is okay with? Okay.
I think it would make her life a lot easier.
Yeah, okay. I just
Right
wanted
now,
to
I
make
think,
sure.
I think Ms. Casto knows what needs to be done, and unfortunately, I think in some situations, because of whatever has been the norm, a lot of times her hands are tied,
Yeah,
and it can be
limited.
quite frustrating, like, to just be able to order paper when needed, like placing orders for things and
Basics.
communication, and yeah, just basic processes and procedures.
Okay, I like it.
Can we get a
And in
motion?
your packet, you'll see kind of Ms. Casto's job description as it originally was, as well as a timesheet that Ms. Harrison presented to me in a meeting that we had, I believe, 2 weeks ago now. Most of those functions, there's no reason why Ms. Casto cannot absorb. And again, with the right training and oversight and support, do effectively as well. And again, that will also free up monies that are being spent out of the EDC to pay Ms. Harrison. Training, there's several items that, you know, we're paying for that I believe are kind of just a
Unnecessary expenditures.
unnecessary expenditure that, again, we could be just operating a little more effectively.
And when will this take effect of
September, I think.
September 1st?
September 1st? Okay.
Yeah, we would start the transition now, but I would want it in place fully by September 1st, which is the beginning of the new budget cycle.
Okay. And then the recording secretary job would be eliminated the next year?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can we get a motion to this change in duties and responsibilities?
I motion the change in duties and responsibilities
Of the recording secretary?
of the recording secretary and administrative assistant.
Give a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and now we're going to go to item number 9, and this will be Justin Pruitt will give this presentation of the BEDC's duties and abilities.
Councilman Hill, you may get a little messed up here. I'm gonna try to use the computer that you're displayed on, so.
Not a problem. Go ahead, Justin.
Press escape, is that gonna kill
Yeah.
anything?
All right, let's see if I can do this where you can also see it, Mr. Hill.
Okay.
Looks good so far.
You look like a professional. Oh my goodness.
Should be a PowerPoint, but-
Up there you go. See?
This music.
Should be the Cleveland EDC, that first one. On that, yeah. So I just want you to know, like, if it's supposed to be a PowerPoint, I'm not gonna do everything in this. And if any of you want a copy of it or anything else, you have questions about it, just ask when I'm talking, or I'll print this off for you and give it to you after the deal.
Are you able to see that, Mr. Hill?
I am. Thank you.
All right.
Can you email it to us?
Yeah, I can email it to you after
Okay.
this too.
Thank you.
I know it's hot, so I'm not gonna go through all of this stuff
Please.
at all. All right, so,
Just the arrows to-
okay, great. So I've done this presentation, we do this for a lot of EDCs, and just different presentations, that's why it's so long, but I think it's good, since we're all new to this, about just to get an idea of what it is that we're doing. And I know that Mike's presented to you, and I'm sure there's probably some overlap on this, and so hopefully I'm not contradicting anything you've said to the board, but, so the idea, so we're an economic development corporation, so I think a good first question to ask is like, what is economic development? And, because I think if you don't, that's the big picture deal, and if we lose sight of that, then sometimes as a board, what we're trying to do doesn't make sense. So, economic development in this context is just really focused on developing local business, promoting local business, making an environment that is attractive to make new business come in, or what it does is you'll, just by either stuff you'll hear from the community or from your professionals, that maybe there's things that exist in this community or in this area, this region, that prohibit some business from expanding or growing, and then by addressing those issues, you may be able to help support and promote local business. Economic development corporations have been around for a long time. There's a big constitutional issue in Texas. Our Constitution prohibits public entities from giving money or aiding private entities. And so then the problem comes, so how is the city supposed to respond to something if you have like a local business that needs help? That either means that we can't do anything, or there's got to be some other way. So over time, what happened is there was these nonprofit groups, these economic development industrial groups would meet as nonprofits to do stuff about that. And over time, those things just became codified, and this is what we have now. And so you are, let's see what the next slide is. Yeah, so over time, what's happened is that these industrial development groups have transformed into these economic development corporations. Originally, there was one type, and it was, if you think of big picture, what they did is it was focused on like national and big regional development projects. So it'd be, like manufacturing plants, big production, things like that, big like interstate warehouse groups. That was the original intent of some economic development corporations. But because of these local needs, the legislature built in these two different types, and we are a type B corporation, and that means we're focused more on local projects. We can still do some of the big stuff. If that ever happens and we ever, some big international firm or national firm wants to come to Brookshire, you as a group at type B can help out with that project. But what you get the benefit of not being a type A is that a type B corporation, you can focus on local, like quality of life type of things, and that's been approved for you to spend sales tax money to promote those types of businesses and those types of uses in your city. So what happens is you have been, this other part too, so sales tax in the state of Texas, the state gets 6.25% on every sale. They allow cities to have an extra two cents, essentially 2 cents. That's why, like, if you go buy something, it's more than likely to be 8.25%. You as a city, the city of Brookshire gets 2 cents. Allotted in that, though, is a portion of that 2 cents comes directly to the EDC. It was voted on by the voters. That portion comes to you, and it's earmarked for economic development purposes. And those purposes are spelled out in the statute. And that's primarily what the slideshow is about, is what you can use that money But it is pretty broad, and as a type B of our size, you'll see when I show the project list here in a little bit, that some of the stuff, it's really just whatever you can imagine. As long as you as a board find that it promotes or expands local business, you can do almost anything you want to with that money that's been allotted to you. So type B EDC Board of Directors, it's you all. So it's 7, by statute, it's seven directors. You're all served 2-year terms. The big deal is that city council can remove anybody at time without cause. And that doesn't have to be a negative thing. It could just be that they, maybe the council sees a different direction and they, can take you off the board. And that's, essentially what happened 2 months ago is the council took action and they adjusted who was on the board. And so this is where we're at. So I think even I saw this question to Councilman Hill. Some people may ask you what the qualifications are to be on a type B corporation. So for you all, it's any one of these 3. You can be a resident of the city, resident of the county, or if we couldn't even find anybody there, then you can go within 10 miles of the city boundaries or in the neighboring county. And a lot of times, for all of you though, we don't have to look farther than the city. We got it. We're covered. But I do represent a few EDC boards that it's just the community is so small that finding everyone that can commit to meeting is hard to do. So they go out into the ETJ or into, we have even one member of one EDC that's within the 10-mile radius. And this is nothing too. This is why, so you have 2 council members on your board. By your bylaws, that's what you've limited it to, or where you require your bylaws to have 2 members. State law, though, allows up to 4. And so, and the distinction there is that when a council member is serving on your board, they are not serving as the council person. So there's a distinction between those roles. And so if it ever were to be that, your bylaws were changed or whatever, and we had 4 council members up here, it wouldn't be a meeting of the council, it'd be a meeting of the EDC, because they're not council members when they're on this board. But you can think about how, so, and this, we have it up there, how the statute works. It says 3 directors must be persons who are not employees. So that means that 4 directors can be employees, officers, with essentially or members of the city council. So in like Brookshire, in their city type, there's 5 council members. So you could have 4 council members, which is just like a super majority of the council, be on the council and then also be at the EDC. So and there's some cities that do that. And so theoretically, you could have something pass in the EDC and then turn around and the super majority of council is going to approve it. And that's perfectly legal, but a lot of people don't like the way that looks. And so that's why, like, you're not any different than a lot of EDCs where they won't allow that kind of overlap just because of what it looks like to people, that it's like a good old boys club or whatever it might be. But here you got 2, and just so you know, when Councilman Hill and Councilwoman Neuendorf are on the EDC, they're not serving as council members; they're directors just like everybody else. So you just did this. You got a president, secretary, and then other officers, and you just approved those. Majority's a quorum. You hold your meetings here, just like is required in the state statute. Okay, so this is where I'm going to kind of hit, this is where I really want to focus on for us. We'll look at some of the projects, but really the procedure, I think that we need to kind of, for me, I always need to come back to this, but for us, we need to really hone in on what it is, how it is you approve a project. And just by the way, I keep saying the word project because I'm using that specifically because in the state statute, what you're allowed to spend money on, almost all of it, they label as a project of the EDC. So when we talk about what you can spend money on, it's called a project. And so, I think historically for the last at least 3 years that I've been with Brookshire and this EDC, a lot of money and time has been spent on parks, which is one of the authorized projects. So there hasn't been much action to adopt other types of projects. I would assume that we would, once you see the list of what you can do, and you as being members of the community, hearing what can be done, if there's a project you propose, then this is how we go about doing it. So before we do a project, you have to hold a public hearing on it. And so that's before any money is allotted, before you decide to do anything, you got to hold a public hearing. And how that's done is, and it's not really clear in the statute, but how the process that we're going to take with that is that once you advertise for that public hearing, and you'll see this in a couple slides, that starts what's it's called 60-day timeline. And that's why that's important. It's important because we need to hold a public hearing, but also important for when we post that public hearing, the 60-day timeline hits. And just for everything, I think that one of our policies is gonna be, unless there's some exceptions, which there are, that you can be expected, we're gonna hold public hearings as a body, especially when it's related to projects. I know we're getting into budget season, and so why this will come into play is that there's a broad spectrum of how EDCs adopt these types of projects and what you can do. I think that we're gonna take a more conservative, more specific role. I think in our budget process, we'll see how we wanna do it. So on one end of the spectrum, again, this project list you'll see in a second, what some EDCs will do is they'll make their yearly budget and they'll list like general categories in the budget that can kind of address some of those projects. So like land acquisition or incentives or something like that. So that's the budget. So it's real general budget line items. And then what they'll do is before the budget's adopted by you and then recommended to the city council, you hold a public hearing on your budget on those general line items. And then the idea is that you've satisfied, if there's ever a public hearing requirement, you've satisfied that in the budget. Even though you're not specific on what it is you might spend the money on, it's general enough, but that you're covering what could be a project. So you hold a public hearing on the budget item, and then you're done. The good part about that is it's real quick. If you want to spend money, you've done the public hearing and you're good. Not so good on the idea if you want the public to be really in on what it is you're wanting to spend money on, because you haven't even been specific in your budget what it is, and so you don't really know what's happening in the year, what's going to come to your table to maybe approve. So that's one end, is you do one public hearing on your budget. On the other end is that you do one public hearing for each specific project that comes before you, and you approve each one to a public hearing. Negative part about that is that there's a 60-day timeline I'll talk about in a second, and that only starts when you publish notice for that hearing, so it may delay your ability to spend money on a project for 2 months, if you want to move fast. The good part about it is that you all and everyone will know the process, and it's real clear and real specific what you're spending money on. So those are the two ends of the spectrum when it comes to approving budgets and holding these public hearings. There's a lot of iterations in the middle of how some cities do that, but we may take one of those middle roads to account for some of those things. But so just be aware that the public hearing you're gonna start seeing those a lot when it comes to projects, especially for the budget time. But the second note on here is, as a type B with a population less than 20,000, you're not required to do a public hearing if one of the projects is, and I guess I should have said this earlier, is in Chapter 501 of the Local Government Code. So that all that means is that in the Local Government Code, you've got 5 chapters dedicated to economic development corporations. And so if you ever want to sleep, just go start reading that and you'll fall asleep in 2 seconds because it's so convoluted and boring. All this means is the 501 chapter, that's where, when I was talking about those original groups that were these big manufacturing type corporations, that chapter is dedicated essentially to those original type projects. So, and the big key there, and you'll see this in the list coming up too, is they focus on what's called primary jobs. And there's a specific list of what it means to spend money to promote a primary job. So if you have a project that's one of these 501 authorized, the original big time kind of project that affects primary jobs, you don't have to public hearing, because that's understood that that's the whole point of economic development corporations, is to spend money for those types of deals. But when you come to the other ones that aren't necessarily focused on those 501, that are more like the local kind of economic development, then that's where the public hearing is required, to make sure that the public's aware of what their tax money is going to be spent on. Okay, so this is where the 60 days comes in and why that's crucial. So we have to have a public hearing, and why that triggers this thing is that we have to post notice of that public hearing, and that starts the 60-day timeline. So the statute is right there. It says you can undertake a project unless not later than the 60th day after date notice of the specific project or general type of project is first published, you receive a petition from the citizens that's 10% of the registered voters that want that project to be removed, or they don't agree with it. So what that means is that the idea is the citizens, even though they voted to authorize you to spend their sales tax money on economic development projects, there's still an opportunity for them to petition you to not authorize whatever it is that you decided to spend money on the project. And And how we get that is we have to allow, when we post notice of that meeting, the 60-day clock starts ticking. And within that 60 days, that's when the citizens can get this petition ready and submit it to you. So we have to wait that 60 days to receive that petition before we can spend money on a project. And so and sometimes a lot of EDCs will forget this part, or they fail to, publish notice in a way maybe they've done that. Fortunately for you all, you don't have a specific way to publish notice. So how we're doing that is, and this is satisfactory, it's legally correct, is that when we post the agenda, we put on there, like even tonight you have one, which is why it's after this presentation, is there's a public hearing required for one of the projects you may consider coming up. Whenever that was posted, that 60-day timeline starts. We can't spend money on that project until after that 60 days is up, because there could be a citizen group that represented 10% of registered voters could submit a petition to you and say they don't want you to spend money like you're proposing to spend money, if that makes sense. So, and then again if you get this petition, then if the council gets the petition, then you have to do an election to do it. So it's citizen driven for a lot of that. And that's why the timing and this procedure is so clear, is that you gotta hold a public hearing for each project, you gotta wait 60 days, and that's when you can move forward with the spending. Some exceptions to that, but that's gonna be you should expect to see that process. So this is what we're saying. For our thing is you just do standard posting of public hearing procedures on every project, and then you wait 60 days before making commitment. So back to my spectrum on how to do the budget. This is why on the cities that do, EDCs that do the budget and do one public hearing at that time, this is why they do that, because during the year, they don't know what's gonna be presented to them. And it could be something where a company comes in and they need the money, or it's moving so fast that they can't wait 60 days for that. And so instead of having to go through the process of posting a meeting and doing all those processes, they want to be covered under one public hearing so they can move fast and spend money anytime during the year. And that's the reason they do that. Again, the negative part about that is that it's not necessarily the most clear cut to the public about what it is you're going to spend money on, especially if your budget is not real specific. So this is another thing too to keep in mind, is that, and again, with structuring your meetings right before city council, this helps. Having 2 council members on your EDC helps. But sometimes you'll see cities that they want to keep, for policy purposes or whatever, they keep everything completely separate. The EDC functions essentially on its own, council functions on its own. And I've seen those cities where it's been that the EDC, because it functions that way, it sometimes operates in contradiction to, or just without regard to the city council. But the problem is, by statute, the council at all times is entitled to access your books. And like we already looked at, they can remove any board member anytime for any purpose. They can just do that. And then the council must approve all projects and expenditures of the EDC. And again, that's a different interpretation. A lot of different interpretations of what that can mean. Primarily, that means if they approve your budget, they've approved your expenditures. That's what most people do. But nothing stops the council from telling you they don't want you to spend money on something. And so that just always, again, keep in the back of your head, this is not something that we're not just spending money because the council wants you to spend it your way. I mean, you're the board that decides how this money is spent according to this project list. But the council can interact with you and can direct on how some of this money is spent. And so just keep that in mind too, that this is not trying to fight the city council. We're not trying to do anything, overtake them or anything like that. But we're also not trying just to, you're not just necessarily going to roll over and do whatever, but you can function as a distinct entity, but the council has oversight authority for you, and it's pretty strong oversight. So other things to think about, I mean, like I've talked before, we're subject to Open Meetings Act, so that means that when we meet, we're going to post every meeting. We've got to wait 72 hours, so we can't just meet anytime we're free. Open Meetings Act requires us to post an agenda and provide notice to the public 72 hours before we meet at least. So that's why it's not going to be that quick of a movement. So if we find out a project that needs to move real quick, we can't meet about it until at least 3 days until we post the meeting. Public information requests, and this is some training that you'll get, over time too, but public information, just be aware that you serve on this body, that discussions that you have that relate to business of the Economic Development Corporation, which is pretty broad, on your personal cell phone, like personal email, notes you write, all that kind of stuff, that's subject to public information. So citizen, anybody would come in and they can say, I want to see all communications of the EDC board from, July 7th, now until the end of the year, it'd be from July 7th all the way back to May 31st. I want to see all communications. If you've talked about anything and have any, emails even on your personal stuff about that, you're required as board members to turn that over. And if you don't do that, then you're violating the Public Information Act, which is a crime. So it's a high stakes kind of thing. So just be really careful. I think that, I don't know if everyone's got EDC emails yet, but if you don't, then we're getting those done. And it's for that purpose, that you use those kinds of things. And when you have an EDC business, someone calls you on your personal phone, then just be aware that, that if there's any of that stuff that's traceable or whatever, that can be triggered in the Public Information Act. I would say all emails, use your EDC email when you get it, just to keep yourself clear of some of this stuff. Conflict of interest, that applies to you in the sense that if you ever have like your own business, or say maybe like a husband or wife or family member or something has a business and they want to do something that's benefited by your action on the EDC board, then conflict of interest stuff may apply to you. And so if you feel that's coming up, just talk to me. There's specific requirements that trigger a conflict of interest, and that may or may not happen. Nothing prohibits you if you feel like, even though you may not legally have some conflict of interest with something, just to recuse yourself. If you feel like it looks too bad for you or whatever, you can recuse yourself at any time. That's not a problem. Purchasing rules. The board that was just here before you all changed what was their purchasing policy. They followed the city's policy, but then they've changed it to follow what the statute allows, which is much more broad than the city. And I think there's some openness there that may be uncomfortable to some people, but one of the benefits of being on the EDC is you're able to make contracts with people that maybe the city couldn't do that. So you're not required to bid out projects. So if you have like a project that maybe a business needs to have some kind of infrastructure done or something inside their business, and you find that that's a project you can do, you're not required to go out and bid for those services. You have freedom to spend money that way. There are some limited rules that are on file for you to follow, but in general, you have a lot more openness to purchasing and bidding and spending money with contractors than the council does, which is would be a benefit when you're talking about economic development projects. Skip torts, that's just their performance agreements, and I'll get that to a little bit too. Whenever this EDC, if you're going to provide incentives in any way to any business, you have to use a performance agreement, and that's by the statute. And the main requirements of the performance agreement is that you set, there's going to be like infrastructure improvement requirements you have to set, and it's unique to every project, so it's what you decide, and as you work with the business, you'll decide that. But essentially, they'll say, we'll put in $1 million worth of infrastructure, and they'll also have to say how many jobs or what kind of salaries they're going to provide, and those are benchmarks for them they have to meet. The reason you put those in is because if you're providing, especially if you're providing a cash incentive to a business, and they don't meet those requirements, state law requires you to have a way to get the money back if they don't meet the terms that they've agreed to. So if a company comes in and they say $1 million, we're going to put $1 million on the ground and we're going to hire 10 new full-time employees by February 1st next year. Well, come February 1st, they only have $850,000 in the ground and they only have 6 people. Then a discussion needs to be happening of what you're going to do with the incentive you've given that group, and that's required by law. I think Vicki has talked about this, but one thing is required of you is every 2 years you've got to take specialized training in sales tax. I think this is the biggest racket that's ever been built into state law, because there's really only one company that does this, and it's the Texas Economic Development DEC. Yeah. Well, I think that's
that. 501c3.
Yeah, but I think they got it built in, and so you have to take their training to do this every 2 years. But I think they'll have it in Houston like in October, I think, or something, and so we'll put that on the calendar, and that's something the EDC can pay for your training to do that. Usually it's a 1-day deal, sometimes it's a 2-day deal. But it is helpful though, especially we go through all the projects like this in a lot more detail on how you spend all the stuff. And I don't think the comptroller is going to chop you down if you don't take the training, but we make it a point that we'll be there and we'll get that done. So here's the projects. I'm kind of blow through these because we pulled these right out of the state statutes, and I know it's hot. So, again, all projects from that were these original groups that were designed for this thing. The point was to look at these primary jobs, and so, and the primary job in there to find the statute, a job that a company, so for which a majority of the projects or services are ultimately exported to regional, statewide, national, or international markets. And so again, you see like the original idea for economic development corporations was this big, it's like international, regional connections, and that's shown by these primary jobs. But because you're and those are type A corporation, that's the only thing they can do unless they do some other, election type things. So type B, you don't necessarily have to have those, but here's some of the primary jobs that you can do. So if you have a job, well, again, a project is the name. Let me back up. I think I put it in there. Yeah. So the very first bullet point there is the one condition that we'll always look for. We looked at the statutes and we see if what you're wanting to do is allowable in the statutes as a project. If it is, then you move forward with it. And so, if the project deals with creation or retention of primary jobs, then you can spend money on, this is pretty broad, I mean, think about all the things that you could even plug in here. Land, building, equipment, facilities, expenditures, improvements that relate to job training or recycling facilities, that's there. So if that were ever to come to you, a job training facility that dealt with any kind of primary jobs, you could incentivize that business with any of that stuff there, and that's really, really broad. So infrastructure improvement, this is a really big one. If you have a company that comes in and they say, they're going to do all the, they're going to build from the ground up, do all this stuff, but they need help with their streets. And their project, their business deals with primary jobs, then you can help with, like what it says there, anything required or suitable for infrastructure necessary to promote or develop new or expanded business. Streets, roads, rail spurs, water, I mean, those are big things you can do. It's a lot of stuff. Again, primary deal is the primary jobs. Military bases, that's not really an issue here. Junior college districts might be. So, if there's something that you came in and found out this is something you could partner with, again, same kind of deal. So this is something for you all at type B corporations. I think this is why the previous board was able to focus so much on parks, is because as a type B corporation, you're able to spend your, the tax dollars that are allotted to you on, and I'm just going to read it, how broad this is. It's land, buildings, equipment, facilities, improvements that are required or suitable for professional amateur sports, so that includes children's sports, athletic, entertainment, tourist, convention, or public park purposes and events. And that can mean stadiums, ballparks, auditoriums, and all that stuff. But that's a lot broader than just, baseball. Like a Hovis Park that Hovis Park project is right in the middle of this. Other parks could fall into that. If there was some kind of, like a theater or a concert hall, like it says there, or something like that, as long as it relates to kind of community facilities, you can spend money on that according to this project. And so it's pretty wide open. Affordable housing is something to do, and we looked at if that ever becomes something that you want to look into. Water supply corporations. So this can happen, but the problem with these is that you have to have an election to do a project like this. But you could technically, if you wanted to have a partner with the water district on coming in and improving their lines or doing major infrastructure improvements to them, then you could do that. You have to have an election, though, to get it done. So back to primary jobs. Again, you're a type B corporation. You don't have to focus on primary jobs, but if you have a business that creates or retains primary jobs, you can do all these things listed there. It's essentially anything you want to do. And even if it's not listed by this project, you could find that it develops new or expanded business enterprises. If it's not included in statute, really wide open. Airport facilities, not really related to you. This is the one I think, though, that is really important and I think you may use quite a bit. So you are a type B corporation that in a city with a population of 20,000 or less. You can do a project that includes all the things we've already talked about: land, buildings, equipment, facilities, all that stuff. for new or expanded business development, if you just find that that's what it serves. The catch on this though is that if it's an expenditure you're going to do and it's over $10,000, then most of the time city council, I mean, even though they authorize all the expenditures generally, here what's unique about this one, even though I think you could do a lot, almost anything you could think of under this type of project. If you're spending more than $10,000, then the city council's got to read a resolution 2 times before you can, move forward with the project. And that's in addition to that 60-day window that we're talking about. But this type of project, this is one of the last things that a Type B corporation in your size city can do. And it's really anything you can dream of. And the comptroller's office, even a lot of times, and you'll hear this when you go to this training, is that you will hear them talk about you be creative with it. And so if there's a way that you see that you could really help out a business enterprise or do something to expand some kind of business development, as long as this board finds that you could do that, then this project allows you to expend that money that way, or buy land, equipment, all that kind of stuff. One example of this, another city, for the equipment, what they did was there was I think it was like a science, some kind of engineering, science kind of manufacturing firm, something like that was there. School district wanted to partner with them somehow to have like a STEM training program. Well, the EDC, so they worked that deal out between the school district and this company. It was a separate deal, but the EDC in that corporation, in that city, which was under 20 grand, under 20,000, came in and bought the equipment for the program. And they found that it promoted new and expanded business development because it was the way that and the junior college is also connected, that if they went through this program, it helped them to get some kind of certification in the junior college deal. So essentially it would lead them to have the potential for more business expansion for STEM type research. But the EDC came involved and they were able to do it by this project by buying all the equipment for that program. So it's, again, dreamed up, really, really interesting thing to do. And there's some other ones here, and I won't miss too much for this right now. So again, if you want to fall asleep, chapters 501 to 505, takes a little bit, all that stuff's in there. If you have questions about it, if there's an interest in anything from any business that you hear, maybe talk about it. More than likely, the answer is going to be, even from the attorney is going to be, can you do it? It's not going to be no. It's probably going to be probably. And what you got to think about how to structure it so we get fit into one of these types of projects. So, and the reason we did it here, just by the way, in the structure of the agenda, is that you'll see coming up on item 12, we're going to conduct a public hearing and then decide about a backup generator for the convention center at City Hall. The reason we did that way is that I just wanted you to see the process while you're having a public hearing. It's required to do a project. And there's 4 or 5 different types of projects that you could justify buying that generator. And so I think we're definitely safe that way. But either way, we got to start the process with the public hearing. And that 60-day window started when this agenda was posted for that project, if you approve it. So yeah, anything at all that you have questions about, just email, call, talk to me. But that's what it is to be an EDC director. You've got a lot of fun to do. So that's that item.
Thank you.
Okay. There's no vote on this, by the way, so we're moving to, unless anyone has any questions for Justin or move on. Okay. We'll go to item number 10. Discuss and possible action regarding hosting quarterly business retention and expansion events. Jeremiah.
For time's sake, let's postpone this one, or table it, to the next meeting.
Okay. I have to do a motion for that to postpone
No.
it? Okay. Okay, and item 11, the new logo and branding. I like the one in the lower right-hand corner, just putting it out there. Or do you want to table this as well, Jeremiah?
If everybody's kind of the same mind, there's 4 options there for us to look at. I'd like kind of input on that. the sooner we can kind of move forward with that, the better off we'll be. But I would like kind of everyone's input on which ones they like, and if everybody's in consensus, we can move forward with one of those.
Like I said, my favorite, because Amelia jumped, I do a lot of marketing, and I actually have made a lot of logos, is that lower right one. I like the way it looks. I don't know, it just draws your eye to it out of the four. So that would be my input on that.
So we need to choose which
Well,
one?
I don't think we have to choose. If we all come to consensus, we can, or we'll have to continue to
Could I
discuss.
ask, how were these delivered?
Jeremiah, did you have those sent to one of those places that make logos, or?
Did you hear the
I
question?
couldn't hear what was being said.
The question was, how were the logos delivered?
Yeah, I've never seen that on an agenda item before.
I'm sorry, I could not hear what was being said.
I hadn't seen logo or branding on an agenda item. How did we come about with this?
Well, the current logo we have right now is the city seal, and then someone has staggered Brookshire Economic Development Corporation over that. And so it's not a very professional look to begin with. And I'd like to see us have a more concerted effort as far as online presence and that kind of stuff. And I feel we need minimally a logo that, is presentable in that regard. But yes, it was on the agenda. It was posted.
This agenda was to discuss and also, how were these four logos presented would be my question.
Like, you mean, how are they created?
Or how did you receive them?
I mean, you can reach out to a company and ask for them to provide sketches for possible logos. Doesn't mean that they were paid for.
I'm pretty cognizant of that, but there's never been any direction or action of board to do that, have there?
It's on today's agenda. It says discuss and possible action regarding a new logo and branding. So we have 4 options presented to us. So we can either take action on these 4 options or say no moving forward. There's different conversations that can happen outside of a meeting with different developers and all sorts of other conversations that we can have and invite people to come and present to meetings based on agenda items that we have.
I've only been doing this in accordance with the statute since the statute was created. I don't recall at the last meeting where there was something said about authorizing someone to solicit logos. Maybe there was and I missed that.
I'm not.
Just wondering how they occurred, that's all. I mean, I'm not, I think the current logo is atrocious. Don't misunderstand me.
Right.
But
And I understand Mr. Barnes' company also does logos as well. I went out for these, and I'd like us to review and potentially discuss one. If the board does not find one of them suitable, we'll go out for others.
Just like a comment on the design, whenever we're looking at a logo, we have to also think about like what we're gonna put it on, if we're gonna use it for any kind of like items that we're gonna give to people or anything like that. And this is my experience, the more detailed a logo is, the harder it is to embroider or sometimes even laminate to things in a way that looks very professional. So
Correct.
I think all these are really good and a good direction to start, but I think the more simple the logo, the better, as far as always keeping like a crisp look if we're gonna use this on like apparel or any kind of like mugs or anything that we're going to be giving out to people. I think when we were given, I think like a mug recently, there's a little bit of a blurriness. It's just something that I pay attention to. Like when you present yourself to the world, it has to be in a way that it's like, it's just, here's a pen from the Brookshire EDC. If the pen looks a little blurry, I don't know, that little detail, I think just kind of, I feel like if it looks nice and clean, it says a lot about what we're putting out there. So I think just keeping like in mind, like small text, like small little text is very hard to translate when we're getting like products made.
No, I agree. I think I like the look of that, just that, but underneath all that, when you go to embroider that, no one can see that. So how do we want this to represent the economic development corp from recognition? Because then on top of it, there's branding, and it's just like, that's a lot of words.
Yeah, and so part of that might be just like having the two logos where there's one logo that has kind of like the title, Brookshire Economic Development Corporation, and then one that's more of a symbol
Of
that doesn't include all the text,
Right.
but it's still something that we think captures the spirit of this community, and it'll, you know, ideally with the logo you want it to be something people recognize from a distance. So that's the Brookshire EDC logo. So something that's, you know, it's gonna stand out to people, but, you know, maybe two, like the symbol would be one thing, and then we have a second option where we use for stationery and things like that, that has the full
words.
title.
I agree.
Yeah.
A lot of that can be established with the brand book as well. So establishing like fonts, like you have a set font for whatever Brookshire Economic Development Corporation is written in, that font has to be used every single time. Even establishing the different hex color codes and things like that. I'm in agreement with you on that one. I know like the top left one is the option, the Economic Development Corporation, the font's very small. And then I was concerned with the bottom left of some of for the word Brookshire, it looks like it might be like a sans serif type of font where some of the lines are very thin, and that could run into a problem if screen printing or decals or something like that. And you can also have different options. So like I know there's one on a black background, but you can easily change that font to black and put it on a white background and vice versa for different things.
If it usually comes in a whole package.
Right, usually, yeah, a brand book package.
Alrighty. So do we want more options, or?
Does anyone have any other comments? Do we want to take our time and look at and see more options than this? And push this to the next meeting, maybe with a larger,
So I guess what I'm wondering is, like, are we trying to kind of rebrand the website and all of this pretty quickly? Is that why we're looking for a logo, get something approved pretty soon?
No, it doesn't have to be done quickly, but I do want it to be done with somewhat of intention. You know, 6 months from now, it's kind of taking too long. And, you know, one of the things we'll be discussing soon is marketing materials. Right now, we're pretty much out of anything. So now is the perfect time if we're going to rebrand. It really needs to happen now versus purchasing more materials under the old logo and that kind of stuff.
Okay. So do we want to, like, everyone mention their favorite and see if we get a majority? Like,
Well, I think the one on the top, just with a different background, the one on the right-hand side, because it seems like that if you're using that for like T-shirts or stationery, it seems like it would just transfer better, just with a different background. Not the black, you know. Of
Yeah, I
course, you
think
know,
it
you
just
can
has the
switch- you can
example on the
switch
black background.
Yeah, you can switch the color.
good thoughts.
I know.
I liked both on the right-hand side. I think they both stood out to me a little bit more. This one, though, to me feels like it looks like Longhorns.
Maybe
That was the
that's why I
first
like
thing
it.
I thought about.
Was it? I don't know. It did through my eye first, but I like the upper corner one too. I mean, like I like
Either
even though
one.
I just didn't. I didn't like the text.
Yeah.
All I see is Brookshire. It doesn't say who
This
we
one to
are.
me looks like an automobile symbol. Car symbol. But I do like the two on the right.
And so these are our only options at this point.
If
We could
want-
always solicit additional options as well.
What they can do is they can take those two and expand and give us different looks of those two to consider?
Yeah, with like the, you know, the feedback that we provided about the letters being one of those things, like just the text, the font, and the size of the letters being easy to get put on actual products. But yeah, I think the two on the right hand side, I mean, I like all four, honestly, I'll be honest with you, but just the text thing was my concern on the majority of them. Like, fine little details are the ones that I think we should avoid.
Jeremiah, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, let's take those two on the right, and we'll get some more revisions of them done, and then we can bring it back to the next meeting and go from there.
Okay. Okay, we are going to item 12.
Let's, item 12 and 13, let's postpone those to the next, or table into the next meeting for time's sake. I know Mr. Barnes still needs to present, and we're butting up against the city council meeting.
Am I supposed to say something?
No.
Okay. All right,
And 14.
going to 14. Discussion and possible action regarding setting a date and time for strategic community assessment plan workshop. Mr. Barnes.
I guess the question is, when do you wanna have this done? My suggestion would be to have it done at your next board meeting. You've got a regularly scheduled time, it'll take about an hour, rather than try to get folks in between now and the next board meeting. I mean, that seems to be fairly logical. I'm happy to do it, you know, tomorrow morning if you want me to. I'm just sensitive to your schedule.
Our next regularly scheduled board meeting would be in August, correct? And would we be approving 22, 23 budgets as well? I don't see that would be feasible to do them all at the same time. If we start at 5:30, we have an hour and a half until council meeting.
The problem with having it at the next meeting, again, there's going to be some agenda items that need to be discussed. So it almost need to be the day before or the day after, if that would work for everyone else's schedule.
What's the date of the
What's
next
the date?
meeting?
It'll be the first Thursday of August, which is August 4th.
Yeah, Friday.
I cannot do August 5th.
Yeah.
I would prefer the Wednesday the 3rd.
My son's getting married on the 6th. I have
That's unacceptable.
I
We
know.
have meetings to do.
Congratulations.
right?
The Wednesday works for me. Friday, no, I won't.
With the daytime or the evening?
For me, the evening I work.
Evening, yeah, we all work.
So, what date was it?
When do you wanna do it?
Oh,
That would-
Wednesday,
August 3rd.
August 3rd.
Okay.
5:30, good?
Mm-hmm.
5:30?
Everybody okay with
Okay.
5:30? Any
Yes.
conflicts?
Yes, that works.
Okay, we need a motion to schedule that for August 3rd at 5:30.
I move to schedule a strategic community assessment plan workshop for Wednesday, August 3rd at 5:30 p.m. at the Brookshire City Hall.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 You said 5:30, right?
Yes, ma'am.
5:30, yeah.
August 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and item 15, BEDC Coordinators Report.
I think in your packet, you should have copies of, maybe 2 newsletters in our, report. And that report would be from the time of the last meeting through July 5th. One of the things that I want to draw your attention to in the report is you'll see sections where, let me throw a couple things out. You'll see GHP. GHP is the Greater Houston Partnership. I don't know if you all are familiar with how we get leads here or not. Are you familiar with that process?
No.
Yes? Okay. The Greater Houston Partnership is a regional economic development group. We have a very good relationship with them. We get leads from the Greater Houston Partnership. We get leads from, and you'll see that in their GHP. We get leads from the governor's office, many of which are overlapped with GHP. Governor sends them out. GHP, I don't say regurgitates them, but to some extent they do. And we also get leads from, in that system, from utility companies. So at any given time, my email goes off with sort of 3 dings on the same project. So you understand that that's one way that the leads are generated. The other way is that we're integrated with commercial brokers, site selectors, and developers. So we'll get leads that way. I know actually Mr. Hill has had the, I don't know if I'd call it dubious honor or some other kind of honor of seeing some correspondence with the site selector that we've had back and forth over the last 2 weeks in terms of trying to get information to them. I know that the attorney has been involved in that as well. And we're fairly well integrated into all of those plugs, if that makes any sense. You'll see on a number of those that we did not meet specs. What does that mean? Well, they could be looking for a 30,000 square foot building with 40-foot ceiling heights. We don't have it that's available on the market. Or they could be looking, some of those are looking for 2,500 acre sites. We don't have that either. One of the things that I need to make you aware of is that a lot of these leads will come in and say, heavy industrial zoning mandatory. We don't have that either. So there are a lot of reasons there that you'll see did not meet specs, if that makes any sense to you. And we sometimes will even submit on projects where they'll ask for, certain types of zoning, even though we don't have zoning, just to get us in the queue, if that makes any sense to you. It's a project that looks like it's a viable project. Our best product right now, and I think probably in the foreseeable future, is the vacant space at String at Empire West. We've got proposals out, let's say we and the developer, on projects ranging from 760,000 square feet to 1 million square feet. I'm one of those, when you see the thing that Justin put up there about primary jobs, I'm a primary jobs guy. I think even though we're a type B, primary jobs drives the train in every economic development setting, really. And those are the kinds of jobs that will go in typically to the space there at Empire West. I don't know if there's anything else, in the interest of time, I'm trying to get you all to city council. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or address your comments.
I don't think I have anything at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've got item 16, the president's report, Jeremiah.
Just to keep y'all aware that right now me and Ms. Castro are in the process of going through all EDC equipment, computers, all that kind of stuff, making sure all that's in the possession of the EDC. Hopefully by the next meeting, Ms. Castro is going to have binders for all of y'all that has the agenda, packets, minutes, financials from the current approved budget to year-to-date expenditures, current past projects, BEDC documents such as the board member list, bylaws, policies, and procedures, all the kind of stuff that you may want to be able to reference quickly without having to necessarily call Mr. Pruitt. It will have Mr. Pruitt's information in there as well as Mr. Barnes' information as well, and Ms. Casto. Beyond that, Ms. Casto is going to send out an email to all of you with the training date. Please select one of those and make sure you get that set up to attend. And that's all that I have.
We don't need to do the next 2 items. We don't need to.
Okay, so then We'll move to 19, to adjournment. Somebody want to?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.